Sensational. America is on the verge of exploding, the Senate is in revolt, Marco Rubio has broken free from Trump's control, polls are sounding the alarm, the people are rejecting the Ukraine policy, and a real political uprising is beginning in the US. Hell is beginning. Zelensky personally gives the go-ahead for the ballistic Sapsans, missiles from which the Kremlin cannot hide. For years, Moscow has feared this retribution. The Ukrainian armed forces have marked targets on the map of Russia, the weapon of vengeance. Ukraine's secret assembly line is producing a mega arsenal. The Kremlin is trembling, developments that no one else has. A triumph for the Ukrainian defense industry. Europe is rebooting the rules of war. Tons of ammunition will pour onto the front lines. This decision for Ukraine has already been made. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. America is exploding from within. A political coup is brewing in the United States. People are turning away en masse from Trump's policy on Ukraine. Polls are sounding the alarm. Americans do not support the president's policy. The Senate is openly rebelling, and a quiet war is starting within the administration itself. Even Secretary of State Marco Rubio is effectively slipping out of Trump's control. All the details, stay tuned.
Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Boston. In dozens of U.S. cities, mass protests have taken place against the peace plan proposed by Washington, which, according to participants, effectively legitimizes Russian aggression and forces Ukraine to accept Moscow's terms. The American political establishment has also joined the mass protests opposing Trump's policies. For example, in Chicago, Representative Michael Quigley joined the protests.
When authoritarian regimes try to erase an entire people, the world has no right to remain silent. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past, and we cannot allow Trump to force Ukraine to accept a false peace, a peace dictated by Moscow.
Americans are very dissatisfied with Trump's policy toward Ukraine. If the 47th President of the United States began his second term in office with the support of 47% of the population, then due to the peace agreement, or more precisely the effective capitulation of Ukraine, which the White House is trying to force Zelensky to sign, Trump's approval rating has dropped to a historic low. It's not just ordinary Americans who are dissatisfied with the peace plan. The agreement has sparked noticeable resistance in the Senate, both among Republicans and Democrats.
Putin has spent the entire year trying to make President Trump look like a fool. If administration officials are more concerned with appeasing Putin than achieving real peace, then the president should find new advisors.
This capitulation agreement is not suitable for America, Europe, or Ukraine. It was written by Putin and benefits only him.
He constantly threatens that the US will withdraw from the negotiations if a peace agreement is not signed in the near future. But in reality, he can't do that, at least not until the US midterm elections, to the House of Representatives and the Senate in November 2026. Because his approval rating is falling and support is declining, which means even more so. Trump won't dare anger the voters.
He has already damaged his relationship with part of his own audience, with the so-called leaders of the MAGA movement, over the Epstein Files case and the scandals surrounding their publication. Accordingly, if he now announces that he's completely washing his hands of Ukraine and forgetting about it, he'll ruin his relationship with the conservative Republicans, the traditional conservative Republicans, who may keep quiet but still have quite a significant influence within his own party to this day.
Trump wants peace agreements and wants all the glory for himself, and anything that doesn't bring him personal benefit doesn't interest the president. In turn, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in his recent interview, stated a pro-Ukrainian position in the negotiations and assured that Ukraine has good prospects and that without security guarantees, a peace treaty will not be signed.
Theoretically, if everything is done right, in 10 years, Ukraine's GDP could surpass Russia's GDP. That's what's needed. To stop the war, to make sure they are never invaded or attacked again. To protect Ukraine's long-term sovereignty and independence so that they do not become a puppet state. They are truly independent and sovereign, and this allows their economy not just to recover, but to thrive and turn into a success story.
Ordinary Americans are taking to the streets in protest. Senators and congressmen are already openly voicing their disagreement with a peace deal, and even Trump's closest circle is against making concessions to Moscow. Meanwhile, the 47th president is talking about the need to hold elections in Ukraine. But if he doesn't listen to those around him, he himself might not make it to the end of his presidential term. In the United States,
Extreme revenge for Russia. Zelensky officially launches the Ukrainian Sapsan ballistic missiles. Hell, it's starting right at this very moment, and this is just the beginning. The armed forces of Ukraine are already planning a strike from which the Kremlin won't have time to recover. All the sensational details are coming up next.
Sapsan in action. The armed forces of Ukraine have started using domestically produced ballistic missiles to strike the enemy. The exact specifications of the Sapsan missile are not being disclosed, but its appearance in the arsenal of the Ukrainian military will allow them to strike enemy targets, possibly even more effectively than with the use of ATAK-MS. Ukrainian missiles have twice the explosive power, fly faster, and have a greater strike radius.
What is the exceptional advantage of using the Sapsan operational tactical complex? It's that its use against targets both on the territory of the Russian Federation, indeed primarily on the territory of the Russian Federation, as well as against legitimate military targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is an exclusively sovereign right of the Ukrainian side itself.
In addition to Sapsan, the Ukrainian army is using several other domestically produced missiles against the aggressor country. This was stated by the President of Ukraine.
This indicates that the Ukrainian side, despite the intensity of strikes on defense industry enterprises, has managed not only to preserve the infrastructure of its defense industry, but also to increase and scale up the production of its own strike weapons. This testifies to the presence of qualified engineering personnel, and B, there is sufficient funding for Ukrainian defense industry enterprises that are capable of scaling up the production of Ukrainian-made strike weapons. Virtually all Ukrainian strike weapons consist exclusively of Ukrainian-made components.
Let us recall that in September of this year, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine is actively developing long-range weaponry. He stated that the tests were successful and the next stage is the launch of serial production. Earlier, Ukraine began production of Flamingo cruise missiles with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. On Friday, December 5th, the company Firepoint delivered another batch of cruise missiles to the Ukrainian military. Also in November, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked important targets on Russian territory. Long Neptune missiles were used for the strikes. Another important development is drone missiles like Polyanitsia, Peklo, Ruta, and Bars.
The Ukrainian side is ready to scale up and deploy its own strike assets across the territory of the Russian Federation. This referred to the Sapsan and accordingly the Flamingo. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have scaled up the production of strike drones with a target range of over 1.5 kilometers.
Ukrainian armed forces are successfully striking military targets in the Russian Federation, and oil refineries are also in the crosshairs of drone systems.
It was precisely the use of Ukrainian strike assets that made it possible to effectively block the operations of about 40% of Russian oil refineries. According to the Russian side itself, losses to the Russian budget are estimated at around $100 billion. But it should also be noted that the Ukrainian side does not intend to stop at these achievements.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used at the front. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased dozens of times. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create innovations in the defense industry and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
Starting from the new year, the Ukrainian defense industry and the defense forces of Ukraine will receive Ukrainian ballistic missiles with a target range of about 800 kilometers. Moreover, it should be noted that the manufacturing company, it announces the development of 2 ballistic missiles with a strike range of up to 200 and, respectively, up to 800 kilometers.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weapons that destroy important enemy military targets at great depth. Urgent, on the outside, about the retribution that the Kremlin feared. Ukraine's secret military conveyor belt is producing developments that no one else has. Their armed forces have received a mega arsenal. The Kremlin is trembling, the generals are in a panic, and experts are already calling this a triumph of the Ukrainian defense industry. All the shocking details are in the report.
The Ukrainian defense industry is gaining momentum. Ukraine is becoming a world leader in weapons production.
Europe must help Ukraine become a steel porcupine that no aggressor can overcome.
The Security Service of Ukraine has demonstrated new Sea Baby Maritime drones, which have already been tested in combat. The upgraded babies are capable of traveling more than 1,500 kilometers and carrying up to 2 tons of cargo. 2 versions have been presented. One is equipped with a machine gun mount and an automatic target recognition and tracking system. The second is a Grad Maritime platform with a 10-round multiple launch rocket system.
Our drones have changed the balance of power in the Black Sea and have proven their effectiveness. The new generation of Sea Baby is even more effective. Therefore, the work to clear the Black Sea of the Russian fleet will continue in the future.
In addition, the upgraded drones have reinforced engines and a modern navigation system. Earlier, in June 2025, new models of maritime drones were used during the strike on the Crimean Bridge. We
approached by land, approached across the water surface, and in 2025 we came in underwater. There were 2 strikes, each with a force equivalent to 1.1 tons of TNT. As a result, they were seriously damaged. Its key supports, the so-called piers. Essentially, the bridge now operates with a load limit of no more than 5 tons, with trucks moving across it. The enemy is not conducting any military logistics there.
Ukraine's allies are in no hurry when it comes to supplying long-range missiles that the armed forces of Ukraine could use to destroy legitimate military targets of the occupiers, deep in the Russian rear.
A story in the Wall Street Journal claimed that the US had supposedly approved the use of Ukrainian long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. Fake news. The US has nothing to do with these missiles.
Kyiv, for its part, has focused on producing a wide range of its own long-range missiles and drones, which are regularly used to strike Russian territory.
It's wrapping up now. I really love this so much. Damn. As of today, Ukraine produces dozens of long-range missiles like the long-range Neptune and Fomin every month, as well as thousands of long-range and rocket-powered drones.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their air force. That's why these are needed. And I'm not even mentioning the necessity of striking enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
Weapons manufacturers have not forgotten about the Ukrainian goddess of war, Bodana, either. This year, Ukraine became the world leader in the production of self-propelled artillery systems. Artillery remains the queen, and Ukraine has mastered the production of howitzers. Despite the role of FPV drones on the front line, artillery has several advantages over unmanned aerial vehicles. First of all, range of engagement. For the Bodana, this figure is 45 kilometers. The shells are inexpensive and immune to radio jamming, and they are also extremely effective against enemy infantry.
The warhead, that is, these are completely different capabilities for striking both personnel and, accordingly, equipment and command posts, the enemy's permanent temporary deployment locations. If an FPV drone targets a single objective, meaning a specific serviceman of the occupying army, then accordingly the Bodana self-propelled artillery system is designed to strike area targets. In other words, it is what holds back the so-called local assaults by Russian occupiers.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Siversk has not been captured, although the situation in the city is difficult. The Operational Command East has refuted Russian fake news about the capture of the city. In turn, the Deep State Project reported that Russian occupation forces have intensified their attempts to advance in the Siversk area of Donetsk region. According to experts, the enemy continues to amass infantry near the settlement. The situation also remains difficult in the Pokrovsk area. However, our command reports that the situation has nevertheless managed to improve. The Russian advance has slowed down significantly and the enemy has lost part of its logistical routes.
The maneuvers carried out by our fighters, which stabilized the front, including getting out of a difficult situation in the areas of Suky Yar and Lysivka, have now leveled the front line. This is clear today. The Russians have not managed to change anything fundamentally, despite the fact that the enemy is making enormous efforts today to try to advance both in the city center and accordingly into the northern districts of Pokrovsk. However, they have not succeeded in doing so.
At the same time, a number of analysts report the actual encirclement of neighboring Myrnohrad. According to open sources, the defense forces did have to abandon some positions. However, the occupiers have not managed to close the ring. They still can't. And accordingly, the cauldron did not happen.
In the region of Kupensk, there have been notable and significant successes. These achievements represent important advancements and positive outcomes, demonstrating progress and favorable results in various endeavors.
In Sutam have reached such a scale that even Z-War correspondents cannot help but acknowledge them. In particular, it is reported that Russian troops in the city have already been cut off from the crossing over the Oskol River to the north, through which supplies are delivered.
This raises the question, how did Gerasimov's report on the capture of Kupiansk affect the situation? Usually such things have the most negative impact. After lying to the higher-ups, the command on the ground is forced to make reality match the reports, regardless of losses or reasonable necessity.
On the contrary, some successes of the Russian Federation are acknowledged by the Ukrainian command in the Kharkiv region, particularly in Vovchansk. In Vovchansk, the enemy also managed to advance a little through the ruins that Vovchansk itself is in today, obviously. I assume that most likely the pressure in this direction may be increased. However, Russian losses today, and let's say the Russian units present in this area, have become somewhat exhausted. But in the south of the country, the front has finally been stabilized. The alarming news that had been coming from the positions in Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions in recent weeks seems to have come to an end. The reserves that arrived in these directions have accomplished their task. They have tied down the Russian assault units.
Today, Ukrainian defense forces managed to improve their tactical positions on the Zaporizhia front and in Dnipropetrovsk. We are not naming the locations today, but our forces have made advances. Accordingly, these counter-attacking actions are preventing it. As a result, the Russian army is losing momentum, but again, we expect them to reinforce with reserves.
At the same time, analysts note that in recent months, amid Russia's desperate assaults, more and more information is appearing online. Videos from Russian positions are appearing, where they openly talk about the price paid to take control of this or that forest plantation.
There are no rotations, no food, we drink from puddles. Water doesn't arrive for 3 days at a time, food doesn't arrive, the guys are dying. In a month, more than 50 people have already been killed or wounded. People, if you hear this video or know about it, please help. They're sending us to slaughter, commanders. They don't even consider us human.
Well, maybe this will finally reach those who are still thinking about joining the Russian armed forces. Because Russian contract soldiers simply have no other prospects.
Breaking news. Czechia is effectively entering the war against Russia and a real envelope of death has been launched. Tons of ammunition are already being prepared to pour from Czech arsenals straight to the front lines. Europe is rebooting the rules of war. This strategic decision could finally bury Putin's plans. All the explosive details are coming up next. Ukraine and Czechia are creating their own Ramstein. Our country's goal is to deepen this cooperation through the signing of an intergovernmental agreement and a support program for affected enterprises. An industrial Ramstein, noted Oleksiy Sobolev, Ukraine's Minister of Economy, Environment and Agriculture.
Not only the Czech defense industry, but also the country's political leadership at the moment of these so-called technical initiatives is a key element in the material and technical support of Ukraine's defense forces.
The Embassy of the Czech Republic in Kiev reports that the Czech Republic supports Ukraine's democratic transformation and Euro-Atlantic integration. This support is provided both on the political level and through concrete projects and initiatives. For the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Ukraine is a priority country for transformational cooperation, a country of special focus within Czech development cooperation, as well as a beneficiary of humanitarian aid.
At present, according to the Czech initiative, around 2 million artillery shells have already been delivered. This has significantly strengthened the position of Ukraine's defense forces, both in terms of counter-battery warfare and accordingly the effectiveness of their firepower. in their confrontation with the Russian occupiers. The Czech side has also delivered around 70 tanks for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. T-72, M1 tanks, more than 140 infantry fighting vehicles, multiple launch rocket systems, and accordingly, about 4.5 million rounds of ammunition have been delivered, including artillery shells. This includes munitions for artillery systems and rocket projectiles plus firearms. In
the conditions of the war in Ukraine, 220 Czech companies remain active. Also, as part of the cooperation, Ukraine plans to provide the Czech Republic with a list of the industrial equipment needed by enterprises that have suffered as a result of military actions.
In this country, damaged armored vehicles and weapon systems are being repaired. In addition, there is also the production of artillery shells, primarily of the Soviet caliber, 152 millimeters. These are the enterprises that have remained on Czech territory since the days of the Warsaw Pact. And considering that about 70% of the weaponry used by the armed forces of Ukraine is still of Soviet design, this is invaluable assistance from this country. In
the framework of the Czech initiative, the processes of purchasing and delivering ammunition are being optimized.
The steadfast Czech side has generously provided Ukraine's valiant defense forces with various essential airplanes, numerous powerful helicopters, and accordingly highly trained personnel from the specialized aviation units of its own national armed forces, in addition to other crucial support. At the moment, the main initiative of the Czech Republic is precisely the creation of so-called coalitions, primarily aimed at improving the capabilities of Ukraine's defense forces in the face of Russian aggression.
The historical memory of the Czech people remembers well the disaster that Russia can bring to foreign lands. That is why the Czechs support Ukraine, which is now fighting the aggressor, preventing the Russians from seizing both their own country and all of Europe. In a sensational move, the Czech Republic has launched a deadly mega rocket. This wonder weapon is already being prepared to strike at the very heart of Russia. The new cruise nightmare for the Kremlin will become a trump card for the Ukrainian armed forces, and its capabilities are astonishing. Range, accuracy, destructive power. And this is only the beginning of Western aid. What else have the Allies prepared for Ukraine? All the shocking details in the report. The Czech company LPP has developed a new cruise missile called Narwhal. As early as January to February 2026, the Narwhal will be tested in combat conditions in Ukraine, and mass production is already scheduled to begin in the Czech Republic in March.
What else can be said about this missile? If we have a combination of cruise missiles like Flamingo, Narwhal, and others, I think things won't go very well for the Russians starting from the new year.
The Narwhal, according to Defense Express analysts, is capable of striking targets at a range of up to 680 kilometers. This is more than enough to hit Moscow and the Russian strategic bomber base at Engels.
So, what is known at this point? It is currently known that this missile will have a range of 700 kilometers. It is known that it is about 4 meters long and that its warhead is quite substantial. 4 meters in length, it has good aerodynamics, but its total weight is around 260 kilograms, so the warhead will be about the same as that of the Shahed. 40 to 50 kilograms, no more. It is capable of flying, as I said, for 680 to 700 kilometers, and it has its own navigation system, which is not significantly affected by electronic warfare.
Radim Petrash, co-owner of LPP, explains that ideally Narvelas should be part of a larger ecosystem.
We want to come up with something that will work in a disrupted environment. We will send 10 or 20 of our basic 40-kilogram drones, which will suppress the enemy's air defenses. At that very moment, 2 narvals will quickly fly over them, and above them, another pair of invisible ones.
Therefore, considering that the Narwhal is part of the system, it can be assumed that along with it, the Ukrainian armed forces may also receive the stealth drone Night Ride Stelj and the MTS drone. I'm
not surprised that such missiles are appearing. I'm not surprised that they're appearing in the Czech Republic. I'm absolutely not surprised that the private sector is significantly more effective than state enterprises. And I hope that this missile will be able to cause a lot of trouble for the Russians. All the more so since the Czech Republic states that this is a specific ecosystem, meaning there will not only be a cruise missile, but also drones.
And while the Czech Republic is preparing to test its missile in Ukraine, Norway is planning to purchase a ground-launched missile with a range of 500 kilometers.
The EU says, we will build a drone wall, and Norway says, I'll do my own thing there. Don't worry, they'll take care of theirs. because it's a very wealthy country, they have a lot of money, and now they've announced this program that they will either develop, purchase, or set up some kind of joint production of medium-range missiles, specifically with the aim of being able to reach Murmansk and maybe even Moscow.
Meanwhile, the so-called parade of national projects for the production of long-range weapons has begun in the EU.
The Netherlands is urging its own developers to provide an alternative to the Tomahawk within 3 months. Requirements for range and warhead weight have been announced. Sweden wants to acquire long-range missiles with a 2,000-kilometer range against Russia by 2030 because there is an emergency situation. Will it reach Moscow? France wants to develop a ballistic missile with a range of 1,000 kilometers.
At present, only 3 European countries actually have the means to strike at distances greater than 1,000 kilometers. These are the United Kingdom, which is armed with American Tomahawks and American Trident ballistic missiles for submarines. Then there's France, with its own MDS-N cruise missiles and M51 ballistic missiles. And Ukraine, a nation with its already fully operational and domestically developed long-range Neptune anti-ship cruise missiles and the formidable Flamingo land attack missiles, stands out. Moreover, among these 3 aforementioned countries, it is exclusively Ukraine that possesses genuine and extensive combat experience, having effectively utilized these advanced long-range strike weapons in direct engagements against the Russian Federation.